Welcome to the Talk to Me Petey D podcast. I'm your host, Petey D. This is the podcast where I talk about people management, productivity, and leadership. Today, episode 17, So You Want to Be a People Manager Q&A. I've talked about and written a lot of things about people management. I have a book out available on Amazon, People Management from the Ground Up for new and aspiring people managers. I still feel like there's a lot of questions out there due to lack of information or misunderstanding about sort of what it means to get into people management for the first time. How do you prepare yourself? How do you go about all those things? So I tried to cover a lot of those in the book, but then I also like to talk about it here and in other places. So I gave a talk recently on this topic, had close to 1,000 people come up, which was awesome. And just goes to show that there's still way too much mystery around this topic. So I really enjoyed the session, got a lot of good questions. So I figured for this episode, I'll go through some of the questions that I got, have a little bit more time to reflect on them, and give some answers here. So hopefully that's helpful for people that are interested in, potentially pursuing a people management role or just getting a better understanding of some of the things that they may or may not know about it. So the first question is, when can I move into a people manager role? Do I need to be a certain level of seniority or have a certain number of years of experience or things like that? And again, there's no hard and fast rule to this. I think it depends on the team that you're going to manage, the type of role that it is, the seniority of the people that you're managing. But thinking that you're going to need to be at least on par with your peers or with the team that you'll be managing in terms of seniority. And in most cases, towards the higher end of that, being a little bit more senior or having more experience than those people that you'll be managing. Again, it depends on the situation and the type of role. I also found that for myself personally, and this is something I talked a bit about in the book, is that it wasn't just necessarily the seniority in a reporting hierarchy, but for me, just some age and some time to have some more life experience and maturity. I think that was something that was valuable for me personally, having that before moving into a people manager role. You're dealing with people, you're dealing with lots of different lives and things that can happen. So I found it useful to have a little bit more life experience and perspective myself before, supporting or handling situations with other people. But again, your mileage may vary. I know that I'm sure there's certainly people that are successful that earlier on in years, they move into people manager. But just something to think about there. Now, in terms of actually shifting from an individual contributor role into a people manager role, there may or may not be a sort of a change in your compensation or your relative seniority level. I think it's the same really with moving to any new position. These things are a negotiation and they're dependent on a lot of different factors, who you are, how impressive you are or not, how this role differs from your previous role and different expectations. So a lot of different things that can happen there. There's no hard and fast rule. And I would say just think about it as a negotiation. So sometimes I've heard people talk about, oh, do I need to maybe give up some seniority as an individual contributor to get into a people manager role? Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but I would wait to have that discussion as long as you can and not try and offer that upfront, because you may not have to do it or it may not be necessary. And you're sort of giving that up earlier on in negotiation if you put it out there. And then there are different sort of types of people manager roles, not just sort of in terms of maybe compensation or overall seniority, but how many levels of management that you're managing. Somebody was asking, could you move from an individual contributor into a more senior people manager position? I think you can. I do think if it's more of an organizational leadership position where you're a manager of managers, that's probably pretty difficult to do if you don't have any previous people manager experience. Not saying it's impossible, but that would be, I think, a pretty big stretch in most cases. All right, next up, how do you deal with the screening filter of do you have prior experience if you're trying to find your first people manager job? There's some good discussion in the chat kind of while we were having this call, and I would agree, I think, with most of it is that if you're interested in this role, you're going to have to figure out a way to find an answer for yourself that's yes for this, whether it's sort of virtual experience, which we can talk about in a little bit, but some way to get past that. I also think about it from a hiring manager perspective and some of the practices that I've learned about in inclusive hiring instead of trying to screen out candidates, basically find things that disqualify people. You're trying to screen in candidates. So find ways that you can include candidates in an interview pool. It's a great way to be more inclusive, have a more diverse slate of candidates to look at. I think you should think about the same for yourself if you're maybe struggling to have all of the requirements for a people manager job for your first role. It's unlikely that you're going to satisfy all of those. So I would think about screening yourself in and find ways that you can see yourself as qualified for these roles, because that's really just getting past the first step, and then taking it step by step after that. So um, don't screen yourself out. Find creative ways to answer those questions so you can at least move on to the next step in finding that role, that first people manager role you're looking for. Another question, and I talked a lot about sort of the value of reading in general for leadership and for people management and how that's was really helpful for me. So there's some good discussion about books to read and things like that in the chat. I don't think there's any specific book that you have to go and read. There's so many good people management leadership books out there. Just start some and find what resonates with you. For me, I think it's more important that you build a reading practice. So you're doing that routinely, developing your skills, developing the empathy that comes along with being a reader, as opposed to going and reading a specific book or set of books to get you ready to be a people manager. Lots of good things out there. Just pick some and read them. Um, we talked a lot about indirect authority and leading with that, something I talked about in a previous episode, and got some questions about okay, I'm an individual contributor. What are the sorts of things that I can do to develop my experience in leading without direct authority? And I do talk about this in my book as well. Four kind of general areas that you can think about: culture, skills, projects, and people. These are all things that you can do as an individual contributor now. So culture, understanding your team culture, your company culture. How can you help make sure the team is living out that culture and in the reality? That's something that individual contributors can be really powerful at. It's coming from someone who's not the manager on the team, can really reinforce the team culture if they're understanding it and helping everybody live that culture as well. Skills, the things that you're doing day to day in your work. How where are you a subject matter expert? Can you hold tech talks? Can you mentor other people? Can you help other people develop those skills? That's a great way to practice leadership before becoming a people manager. Projects, going and running and executing a specific project with a project team and taking on leadership roles as part of that project. That's a great opportunity as well. And then the last one, people. If you have the opportunity to manage maybe more junior people on the team, let's say interns or some sort of vendors, that's often something that individual contributors can do. But even if it's not a formal, reporting relationship, just acting as a team lead in various functions, these are all things that you can do as an individual contributor to start building up those practices of leading. Now, shifting more into when you're in the people manager role, I thought this was a really interesting question. How do you handle the situation where you have a subject matter expert on the team who's a strong performer, um, but is sort of a bottleneck or a single point of failure to the team? There are a number of situations where everyone has to go to this person to get an answer, and if they're not there, things back up. And I do think this is a real challenge that can come up. And it's difficult because this person, has a lot of skills. They may have been around for a long time and built that up. And you're not just going to get that overnight. But at the same time, if you do nothing, you're sort of in this situation where you're always dependent on that person. And if they're not there, and, people can not be there for a variety of reasons. And how do you handle that? So, um, I think making it part of that subject matter expert, their expectations and their role is that they're doing specific things to grow the rest of the team, to take over some of that work. So making it clear that that's an expectation in the role, I think that'll help. That helps incentivize people um, to do that. And then um, sometimes having to, force a little bit of giving up control from time to time. Oftentimes subject matter experts in a particular area, they care about the quality of the work, which they should, and handing that off to anybody who is not them is probably not going to meet that that same quality bar. So that may be something that you need to do a little bit of coaching as a people manager. So this is a great question. I do think this is something that comes up frequently, and hopefully those are helpful tips. It's not a kind of cure all. It's something that you have to work through. And I always think about, the team as a moving target, and you always want to be growing newer people, and thinking, people may move and may move to other teams or leave for whatever reasons. So having a culture that's always about learning and development, I think is really important. Um, so this was another good one. This was a question of how do you how can you put the needs of your immediate team before the needs of the company that you're in. I think that was how it was phrased, but sort of, how do you manage the expectations of what you're delivering for your company, your organization, with the needs of the actual people on your immediate team? And I think your goal as a people manager is to try and make those two things align. So we often act as a filter for information going down from an organizational level to the people we manage, or up from the people we manage to higher up in the organization. And I think that's a really important skill for people managers, to learn how to craft those messages and the way that we filter things so we can create alignment there. And really, you should be able to think about ways where the health of your immediate team aligns with the goals of your larger organization and your company. And I think that's a bit of the art behind being a people manager. So I think that's when you can be most successful doing that. There may be scenarios where, for whatever reason, you feel like you have to shelter your team a little bit from some of the expectations higher up. So I could see that being sort of the intent of this question. And you'll just sort of have to feel that out and see what the right scenario is. I don't know that that's something that's sustainable for more than a temporary period, though. So, really, you want to try and search for that alignment between the two, in order to make things sustainable and to make it a healthy environment for you and your team. Another good question: how do you stay out of the friendship zone with your direct reports, or can you be friends with your direct reports? And I think this is a great question. My short answer would be no. You can't really be friends with your direct reports in kind of a true friendship sense, because you always have that reporting relationship. And I think, just, the same way, if you think about anti-corruption policies, for example, it's not necessarily that you would be doing something corrupt by being friends with somebody, but even just the implication, or if somebody were to look at things and assume that there could be some influence from you being friends with somebody you manage directly, that would make things unfair for other people, then that's bad enough. So I think, regardless of the actual friendship, even sort of the perception is something that you have to be careful of as a people manager. Now, all that being said, I think you get to know the people that you manage directly. They get to know you. I think that's wonderful, and that's part of what makes it a rewarding and enjoyable job, and you want to be able to support each other and know each other as people. Um, but I do think you need to maintain some boundaries there, to make sure that you're not biased and that you're being fair to to your team and to your company as well. It's part of the role, and maybe in some cases that means you need to put up some friendship boundaries. Another question was, coming from an individual contributor um, role, shifting to a people manager role. How do you handle the situation when the people on your team maybe don't deliver or do something to the quality or to the level that you would do as an individual? And it's a little bit like the earlier question about getting subject matter experts to be able to give up some of the control when that work may not be done exactly the way that they would do it. I think it's very similar, being a people manager. And you just have to understand that the team you manage is not going to be a clone of you or a little clone army that's exactly like you and does things exactly like you. And that's your role as a people manager, to get to know those people, understand their skills, understand where they can be successful, where they need support, or where they might need to be pushed. And um, just understand that people aren't necessarily going to accomplish things exactly the same way that you would. Um, and I think once you have that mindset shift, it gets a lot easier. And then it forces you to just be very clear about what the expectations are, but then how that person goes and delivers it. I'm in favor of sort of giving people more autonomy there, and they can use sort of their own individual approaches to go and actually do the work, as long as you're clear on what the expectations are. All right, back to finding a people manager role. I thought this was another interesting one. Should I wait for a manager role in my current organization? So you're within an org, you're within a team, you like the work there, you like the culture, you want to stay there and manage. Should you wait for a role there? Um, and again, I think this is going to be situationally dependent and depend on each individual situation. I would just say there's no guarantee that there's going to be a people manager role there. And there's also no guarantee that you're going to get it, even though you may be qualified, you may have experience within the organization. You can't necessarily guarantee that's going to happen. Um, so you're going to have to decide if that's something that you want to wait for. Maybe you give yourself a certain amount of time that you're willing to wait and see if that opportunity is there. I think it's good to talk to your manager and other leaders in the organization and let them know your intent. I think that's good anyway, whether you want to manage within your own org or in other orgs. Um, but just to give yourself more opportunities, you may not want to limit yourself for waiting for that opportunity, because one, it may not come, or it may not come in a timely manner. And two, there's not necessarily any guarantee that you're going to be the one chosen for the role. All right, getting close to the end. I got a question about kind of knowing what I know now. What would I do differently? And my answer, and I'm sticking to it, is nothing really, because whatever experiences you have, good or bad, you can learn from those things. And I'm grateful for all the experiences that I had. I didn't aspire to be a people manager early on, so it wasn't like I was disappointed that I didn't get there earlier. I wanted to go and do some more technical work and build some skills there. And that's what I did. And I'm grateful for those experiences. So um, I would encourage people just to look for what they can learn from what they're doing, and not feel disappointed if maybe they're not where they want to be right now. You should still be motivated and work towards that, but many of these roles can take some time to get to. So just be patient and just continue learning and growing within the role that you're in. And then last but not least, is there anything different to consider when you're moving to a manager on the same team? There's an interesting question that was thrown out there. It's sort of like, if you're coming from internally in a team, is there any sort of peer review or voting that happens to decide if you can become a manager of that team? I thought that was an interesting concept. It's not something that I've seen, and I could see it being challenging, because then you're sort of blocking off the possibility of having anyone external have an opportunity on that role. So I don't know, but maybe there are some situations where that does happen. I could, see it being interesting. That way the team sort of elects who their manager will be, but not something that I've seen personally. And then how do you change your relationships with your former peers as you become their manager? Are there, maybe there are other people on the team that wanted that role. Maybe there's some feeling of competition. So I think just, maybe acknowledging it if it's there, but then quickly moving on and setting yourself up as somebody who's going to help support the people on the team grow and build their career, even if they are looking for a people manager role in general or somewhere else. That's something that now you're in a position where you're in that role and you can help them build towards those experiences. So, um, trying to set up the relationship in a way that is not competitive, but is supportive and helping be a resource to the people on their team. So there you go, a bunch of questions. If you have any more questions or anything about my thoughts on finding a people manager role or life as a people manager, please shoot them my way. Maybe we can cover them in a future episode. So thanks.